Good morning, everyone from Chicago. Really happy to join you. Good morning, everyone from Chicago. Really happy to join you guys via recorded presentation. I'm on the middle of some paternity leave, so wasn't able to do this live. Hopefully, I'll be able to join for some question and answers afterwards. But really excited to take you guys on a CyberSafari looking at underexamined threat actors from the global threat landscape. Typically discussions around state-nexus threat actors focus on bears from Russia, pandas from China, Chollimas from North Korea, and kittens from Iran. And those are great and they tend to be high profile, but the global threat landscape includes enough activity from the cranes of South Korea, leopards of Pakistan, buffaloes of Vietnam, and more to constitute and be worth a whole CyberSafari of underexamined threat actors. This subset of adversaries represents the proliferation of how more and more governments are using state-nexus actors and increasingly conducting targeted intrusions intent on capitalizing on the asymmetric advantages offered by those cyber operations. By examining these actors, their activity, their victims, we can see the diversity of their motivations, different methodologies and capabilities they use, and their targets. This allows for more accurate and complete understanding of how truly global the threat landscape is, and subsequently better tailor our threat models and defensive postures. For the blue teamers that are watching this, hopefully you'll be able to improve your threat models, especially for regional threats. And for your red teamers, hopefully you see some really interesting campaigns that you might give you some ideas for your next engagement. We won't be covering any of the big four that we just talked about because there's already a ton of excellent reporting on them. We're also not going to be covering Five Eyes because I don't think they actually do any offensive operations that I know about, at least. So who I am, my name is Yoshi, I also go by Josh. CyberSafari guide today. I currently work in healthcare cyber threat intelligence and have a couple of certifications. My background is actually in political science and international relations, where I really enjoy the geopolitical aspect to the threat intelligence landscape. Formerly with the FBI before I joined healthcare, and you can follow me on Twitter if you so desire. So as we get started, there's a lot of different models when you talk about adversaries. The diamond model is one of the oldest, and in my opinion, one of the better ways to start thinking about these threat actors and how to understand and cluster them. So when we talk about the diamond model, the first thing we usually talk about is infrastructure. Infrastructure just means anything from the email accounts used for spear phishing, command and control servers or domains, maybe even their IP addresses, really those tangible things. Next is victim. So when we talk about victim, I think victim can be more diverse than people typically think. It's not just the organization or company that's targeted, but also maybe what individual position. Are they targeting CFOs? Are they targeting HR departments? Are they targeting research and development? And then also specific data. Are they after payment card data? Are they after different research for, say, COVID-19 vaccines? Or are they just after anything and everything? And then also the vertical, so are they targeting aerospace engineering? Are they targeting healthcare? That's the thing we look at a lot in my current role. And then next is capability. So capabilities are usually dependent on technical intelligence like malware reversing and ties well to a model like MITRE's ATT&CK. I think that really helps put a common language on what capabilities are and what actors are doing. It doesn't cover everything, but for the most part, it gives a common language for both red teams and blue teams. And finally, it's adversary. Depending on who you're talking to and or working for, adversary can range from the person behind the keyboard, the organization that they work for, whether it's a front company or actual state military unit, or even the customer who said, hey, we have a requirement for this information and sponsored the campaign or intrusion for that information. Again, that varies a lot based off of who you're working with. So when we talk about the adversary, I think it's also important to talk about different aspects of national responsibility. So Starting at the bottom here, we have state prohibited. That's where the national government will help stop the third-party attack. Good example of that is going to be in the United States. You see people that are arrested, extradited, or prosecuted for conducting cyber operations. Next is state prohibited but inadequate. The national government is cooperative and wants to stop the third parties, but they're unable to. They just don't have the capability, personnel, resources, or sometimes even authorities. The next is state ignored. So the national government knows about the third-party attacks, but it's unwilling to take any official action. And one caveat here, when I say attacks, I mean cyber operations in general, not limited to just CNA attacks, just overall cyber operations, both espionage-related, financially motivated, and then also those destructive attacks. Next, we have state encouraged. So third parties control and conduct the attack, but the national government encourages them as a matter of policy. A great example of this are the Iranian hacktivists who are defacing web pages, leaving nationalistic defacements, but aren't operating strictly on the behalf of the Iranian government. Next would be state shaped. So third parties control and conduct the attack, maybe as part of a front company of some sort. But the national government does provide some support to that front company, payment, infrastructure, protection, that sort of thing. State coordinated, the national government coordinates with third-party attacks by suggesting operational details, and that's really where you get into those front companies that are operating on behalf of the government. So next, very similar, is state ordered. The national government directs third-party proxies to conduct the attack on its behalf. Very similar to state coordinated, just suggestion versus direction. Next would be state rogue conducted. So these are the out-of-control elements of cyber forces on the national governments conducting the attack. A good example of this would be freelancers for, say, North Korea or China who conduct intrusions for the government during the day and then line their own pocketbooks at night. For some financially motivated attacks. Next is state executed, where the national government is conducting the attacks using cyber forces under their direct control, uniformed military and or intelligence services actually doing the attacks or operations. And then the pyramid or the apex, if you will, would be national government attacking using integrated third-party proxies and government forces. So this is just a quick look. Our Safari will include looking at the Netherlands, France, Spain, Turkey, Israel, United Arab Emirates, Uzbekistan, Pakistan, India, South Korea, Vietnam, and some South American sets. So as we get started, we're going to start off with one of the more advanced groups that's been publicly talked about. If you ask most people to talk about some of the best hackers in the world, most people won't mention the Netherlands, but in 2018, a Dutch newspaper revealed one of the most sophisticated and successful hacking operations, which is against the APT Cozy Bear APT-29. The Dutch managed to get a clue into Cozy Bear's operations. They literally identified the building they were sitting in. Of course, this was pre-COVID, so there was no work from home. And based off their good preparation and planning, they were able to do more than just pop boxes on the network, but they were able to hack into the security cameras and record everyone coming and going from the operation. So not only did they have access to the network to identify attacks, they also identified individual hackers and officials coming and going from the building. So this access allowed the Dutch, according to this newspaper, to tip off the Americans once Cozy Bear started attacking the State Department, and they gave them information about Russia capabilities, C2 infrastructure, their targets, etc. Additionally, because they had those security cameras, they were able to attribute Cozy Bear to the SVR based off the intelligence officers that were going to and from the building. And this is just one snapshot into what an advanced actor could do with the right opportunity, preparation, and patience. And yeah, a really good attack. So next we have France, which is Babar or Animal Farm, originated in 2007, targeting Iran, Syria, Mali, Malaysia, and others. It was a pretty diverse set of malware and was extremely targeted compared to some other groups that have more wide range. Animal Farm was very targeted. One thing to note was that according to French law, French Cyber Command does have authority to do offensive hacking, and sometimes will do so. So next we have Spain, which is known as the Mask or Correcto. It started in 2007, attributed in 2014. Over 380 victims identified, 31 countries targeted, including governments, energy, research institutions, activists, private equity firms. They were discovered when they tried to exploit a patched vulnerability in a Kaspersky product, and they actually shut down their operations when they were sinkholed, when their C2 infrastructure was sinkholed. Attribution was identified based off of who is information, as well as Spanish language remnants in their malware. And one thing before we go forward or further, I do reference a lot of different research from a variety of groups, Kaspersky, ESET, CrowdStrike, a lot of good firms. So all of my sources will be cited at the end. Please, if you have any interest in reading the actual reports, please go and read them. There's some excellent reporting that people have done. So next we're going to talk about Turkey. This is actually Galata, Turkey. And so when we talk about Turkey, the first threat actor we're going to talk about is Strong Pity or Prometheum. In December of 2016, Microsoft released reporting that indicated Prometheum had been operating since 2012. They've been targeting both domestic and international targets. And Microsoft identified that they were targeting specific individuals within a specific area in Europe. Their 2016 campaign included a 0-day in Adobe and was actually delivered via instant message client. Strong Pity has also been known to use phishing links along with strategic web compromises or watering holes as the initial infection vector. Interestingly enough, they do also use Trojanized encryptors and other apps, particularly to target users in Italy and Belgium. Kaspersky did an excellent job documenting Truvarsis, the malware that was dropped after the initial infection by Strong Pity. The malware is often bundled with legitimate installers and often includes lures in Turkish. This, combined with the locale setting of most of the victims, helped attribute them to Turkey. The 2016 campaign also had multiple similarities with Neodium, a group that likely used Finfisher malware for espionage purposes, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So another really unique group coming out of Turkey is known as Sea Turtle. In April of 2019, Cisco Talos reported on a group they identified as Sea Turtle. The group targeted national security organizations in the Middle East and North Africa and included Cyprus, Greece, Iraq, Albania, Egypt, Armenia, UAE, Jordan, Syria, and Sweden. That's according to both Cisco and I think Reuters, as well as Domain Tools put out some great research on these guys. Assuming they are guys. Let's see. So Sea Turtle executed what's known as the first public example of widespread DNS hijacking. They were extremely successful by first targeting third parties like DNS registrars, telecommunication companies, and ISPs, internet service providers. Once they gained access to these targets, using mostly known vulnerabilities and in some instances phishing, they were able to hijack the DNS of their primary targets, which were those national security organizations. By doing this, they were able to redirect legitimate users to actor-controlled infrastructure that allowed them to intercept and harvest their credentials. According to Reuters, credentials included email services, cloud storage servers, and online networks. Reuters based their attribution to sources that cited three things. First, victimology, like we talked about, similarities to past campaigns, as well as confidential intelligence. And those are just two threats from Turkey that I find pretty interesting. So obviously there is a ton that can be said about Israeli cybersecurity. One of the things I'll cover today is just one example of fourth, possibly fifth-party collection, or what's known as hacking the hackers. So the New York Times reported on the story where the Israelis had hacked into Kaspersky to gather intelligence in 2015. This campaign was identified as Dugu 2.0 by Kaspersky. The Israelis were allegedly able to identify Russian hackers inside of Kaspersky that were searching for intelligence on American programs. So you have the Israelis that identified the Russian hackers. that identified inside Kaspersky that was looking at American programs. The hackers stole passwords and documents and screenshots, as well as emails related to Kaspersky's APT work, particularly those related to the equation group and region. Other targets of the Israeli campaign, as identified by Kaspersky, included hotels based in the U.S. That were related to the UN Security Council negotiations on JPCOA, which was the Iran deal. Kaspersky blog is really good, so I recommend reading it if you're interested in Dooku 2.0. And then when you talk about Israeli cybersecurity, it's also important to talk about private companies in Israel. And one of the best known is NSO. NSO is currently embroiled in a lawsuit against Facebook for using a vulnerability in WhatsApp. NSO tools like Phantom and Pegasus are only supposed to be used by state-ordered organizations for counterterrorism and other missions. But Vice has reported that human rights dissidents, journalists, and political opponents have also been targeted by those NSO tools. One of the reasons I think it's interesting to bring this up is that when we talk about actual real campaigns, this is a great example of what to look for. Some Vice showed that some of the domains used for lures appear to be innocent unsubscribe links or other Facebook links or links masquerading as Facebook. The infrastructure was often procured from cloud providers located in the United States, so it looks pretty legitimate, and it's definitely something to watch going forward as more information is revealed throughout the court case. So next we have Lebanon, and Lebanon's really interesting. Dark Caracal is the name of the group there. So the EFF and Lookout identified Dark Caracal as a threat actor allegedly supporting the General Directorate of General Security in Lebanon. Dark Caracal was originally identified in part because of the infrastructure reused from Operation Manuel, which we'll briefly discuss later. Dark Caracal is considered an APT for a couple reasons. The first being numerous campaigns in parallel, hundreds of gigabytes of data exfiltrated, and then the typical targets of government, military, utility, financial institutions, healthcare, manufacturers. Exfiltrated data, all that data included documents, call records, recordings, contacts, photos, account information. And the interesting thing about this is that it was primarily mobile malware focused as a primary attack platform. So initial access included the usual phishing and social engineering, but then also included physical access to the target devices, which is definitely something that's useful for state-nexus operations. Palas, which is the malware used, was a Trojanized in Android apps as well. Some Finfisher malware was also used, which is the Operation Manuel link. Other malware used included Banducrat and Crossrat. While the infrastructure being used seemed to be shared with multiple actors, the EFF was able to fingerprint some of it rather uniquely, and that's really where the attribution came from. So once they identified the infrastructure being used by Dark Caracal, they were able to identify that some of the logs had actually been left open and unsecured. So based off those open logs, testing devices were identified, and the Wi-Fi networks associated with those devices were then identified and happened to be in a very close vicinity to a building owned by the General Directorate of General Security. Additionally, the command and control address was controlled by 3 IP addresses that belonged to the Lebanese government-owned Ogero Telecom. So next we have the United Arab Emirates and Stealth Falcon / Fruity Armor. So in 2016, The Intercept published an article detailing dark matter's recruitment of cyber personnel from a variety of countries to conduct offensive operations. The report was followed up with reporting by Reuters that showed ex-NSA hackers that were hacking for a group known as Project Raven from a mansion in Abu Dhabi. Alleged targets include human rights activists, journalists, and political rivals. The malware used, which is called Karma, did not require any user interaction and obtained photos, text, and location information. It's hypothesized that it actually used an iMessage 0-day. Also in 2016, Citizen Lab published a report on Stealth Falcon, the group that conducted a large-scale campaign against UAE government critics. The actors first profiled a user's device with a redirect link, and then later in the conversation phished them with an actual malicious document that eventually returned to custom PowerShell backdoor similar to PowerShell Empire. So then fast forward to 2019, ESET published a report about a binary that bears remarkable similarity to the PowerShell backdoor disclosed in 2016 by Citizen Lab. They noted targets in the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Thailand, and a Middle Eastern diplomatic mission to the Netherlands. The binary also uses one of the same command and control domains as this PowerShell backdoor, so that's where they drew additional context. So really interesting to see both the domestic and foreign targeting again by the United Arab Emirates. So when we talk about Morocco, I thought this was kind of interesting because I wasn't really expecting to find much on them. But in 2018, the security company Hayas found hacks against a variety of French industrial firms. After sinkholing the domain, they researched the register information and eventually found an email address that aligned to a DNS server for the malware campaign. In March of 2020, Brian Krebs took that email address, did what he did best, traced it through some forums, and doxed a Moroccan security researcher who was tied to the forum posts and the email. Of course, the security researcher denies being affiliated with the French malware campaign because his email was quote-unquote hacked, and that campaign did use NJRAT. So we all know that Krebs is great at tracing emails and identifying individuals. But at this point, we don't know who directed or sponsored the intrusion, and we may never know who was targeting those French industrial firms using the quote-unquote security researcher from Morocco who got hacked, allegedly. So next is Uzbekistan. So they weren't on my radar as a player in offensive cyber operations prior to my research here, but they've been around for a while. Their national secret police, the SSS, first took interest in commercial hacking tools starting in 2011 and came to light by the hacking team Dumps by Phineas Fisher. Then in 2019, Brian Bartholomew from Kaspersky presented on an APT they tied to Uzbekistan's intelligence agency. The strong attribution to the SSS was possible in part due to horrible OPSEC by the individual operators. Based off of Whois, they were able to identify the actual military unit as well as the military officer's name. Who was behind the domains and behind the unit, behind the campaign. And that's just the first OPSEC failure. Additionally, the operators were testing their software in the 0 days they bought on computers that had Kaspersky antivirus on testing machines. Kaspersky's team was able to grab 3 other purchased 0 days from Sandcat, which then burned them for anyone else who had bought them. And they were able to identify other information for their campaigns before they were even used. So it shows that the sort of visibility that some of the vendors outside of the larger vendors is excellent for hunting these smaller adversaries. They're really those regional vendors see a lot of really interesting things and telemetry that some other companies may not see. So next, we have this beautiful picture from Pakistan. So there's 2 groups attributed to Pakistan we're going to talk about today. The first is interesting. It's the Gorgon group because they have targeted both criminal as well as targeted espionage campaigns. In February of 2018, Unit 42 identified the Gorgon group as targeting governments in the United Kingdom, Spain, Russia, and the United States. And those same campaigns use shared infrastructure with some financially motivated campaigns. Another notable thing from this campaigns is they use URL shortening services to actually download the payloads. This allowed both the campaign operators, but then also researchers, statistical click counts and visibility. When we talk about the capabilities for the Gorgon group, used a variety of rats, including NJRAT, like we've seen other groups use, as well as info stealers like LokiBot. In October of 2019, Prevalion talked about another Gorgon group campaign where the alert documents again used URL shortening services to redirect to Blogspot URLs hosting malicious JavaScript. That JavaScript ran code that was found in pastebin, and then which established persistence via scheduled task and registry keys, and then another pastebin URL was accessed. That infection chain eventually led to a rat that was either typically revenge rat or Azeralt. The other APT tied to Pakistan is Transparent Tribe, also known as Mythic Leopard or APT-36, primarily targeting military and diplomatic targets, primarily Indian. In 2016, Proofpoint's Darren Huss published some research identifying phishing attacks on Indian military resources. These phish included a weaponized RTF document that eventually dropped a portable executable that eventually led to a rat. In addition to the phishing campaign, they also saw a strategic web compromise blog or lure blog that was set up for Indian military users. It included fake articles about the Indian military to entice users to click on it, and it was a dual-pronged approach for their campaign, which is decently unique. And then in 2017, Sysinfo reported actors that allegedly linked a link to Transparent Tribe, targeting officials in the Indian Central Bureau of Investigation, as well as the Indian Army. This continued their Transparent Tribe's historic targeting of Indian government officials. And in May of 2018, CrowdStrike reported that Mythic Leopard continued to use generic-themed Excel documents as lures. They paired well with a unique Visual Basic script to install a variety of implants. Similar to what Proofpoint identified, CrowdStrike identified Mythic Leopard C2s that continued to be reused against campaigns. In March, Malwarebytes reported that this actor had now begun using COVID-19 related lures, and in addition to those lures, the APT had also increased their targeting to include targets in Afghanistan. And then just recently, Kaspersky's put out some new reporting on an Android implant that they tied to Transparent Tribe that's definitely worth looking at as well. The beautiful tiger from India. So let me first start by saying that India is a mess as far as cyber attribution goes, both state-supported and criminal operations. We're going to look at some interesting campaigns that have a nexus to India and talk about different threat groups that have been reported on. But nowhere will this be exhaustive. In March of 2018, a Chinese security vendor reported that a large number of highly targeted spear phishing attacks targeted sensitive Chinese government agencies. In this campaign, the alert document ended up dropping a .NET executable that led to KSAR-rat, that scheduled tasks, and eventually led to XRAT as well. Documents were exfiltrated via post to the command and control. Velexity, another security vendor, reported a similar campaign from the same time frame. In their report, they identified campaigns that also directly attacked U.S. think tanks. In addition to the malware lures, Patchwork, which is who they attribute the campaign to, did something unique by using an embedded image tag that beaconed back to the attacker's domain. That embedded image tag was unique so attackers could see who had clicked on their links successfully. Again, the final payload in that campaign was KSAR-rat. The exploit used was pulled from a public proof of concept post on GitHub, and it was likely not developed internally. And this copy and pasting is what originally gave this APT its name of Patchwork. Symmetria saw a threat actor operating in one of their deception environments in 2016. They were able to identify lure documents on a C2 server, and they all used Chinese-related lures or South China Sea-related lures. The tools all seem to be open source tools available on GitHub. So that, again, using those open source tooling as part of their campaigns. And although that was back in 2016, Indian-based adversaries have not gone anywhere. Earlier this year in May, Unit 42 released some reporting on Hangover or Adversary Tiger, and this activity targeted government and military organizations and worked extra hard to blend in as impersonate legitimate services. It included things like self-signed certificates, unique file descriptions, and convincing error messages within the software. The interesting thing is that instead of using phishing to directly deliver the documents, the actor actually hosted the payloads on compromised third-party websites within the targeted country's TLD. So, in some ways, even more interesting than the state-sponsored activity is the Indian hacking for hire activity. Two main names come to mind that have been publicly reported. The first is Opin Security. The second broke earlier this year and is called Dark Basin by Citizen Lab. Both operations targeted a variety of individuals, including attorneys, dissidents, and journalists. The EFF reported that Operation Manuel, which we talked about earlier, was in use by a variety of individuals, including Kazakhstan, and the campaign that led to the identification of Dark Caracal in Lebanon. Dark Basin allegedly has two different types of campaigns. The first seems to be aggressive and annoying, forcing the user to click the link to unsubscribe. The second was more targeted and masqueraded as legitimate service, asking for access to photo sharing and that sort of thing. If you're interested in following Indian APTs and doing some more research, definitely suggest searching for hashtag Sidewinder on Twitter. It'll get you a variety of malware samples to look at from the community. So next we have South Korea. The first, in November of 2019, a Chinese security company reported a pretty unique campaign that they identified as active since 2016. They called it Higyasa. They used North Korean-related lures to conduct their campaigns and fished diplomatic entities, government officials, expats, and traders. Targets included China, North Korea, Japan, Nepal, Singapore, Russia, Switzerland, and of course Poland, which is an interesting target. Typically, you don't necessarily see Poland being targeted. The spearfishing often happened on important holidays and gave quote-unquote blessings during those holidays. A unique thing about this APT is that they weaponized news lures as soon as 4 days after the news happened. So it was a very quick time from something being newsworthy to being in a campaign. Besides the typical Trojan, there was also a keylogger, an Outlook account password stealer from GitHub, and Ghost Rat as well. Attribution came from a couple places, the first being timestamp analysis, which can always be faked, but it does take some extra work. And then also remnants of Naver.com in the documents. Naver.com is South Korea's biggest search engine. So next we have Dark Hotel or Shadow Crane. That's probably one of my favorite APTs. And active since 2007. In 2014, Kim Zeta reported on attacking the hotel Wi-Fi against high-profile VIPs, including U.S. targeting of the defense industrial base, any sector related to investments and economic development. Targets include the U.S., North Korea, Japan, India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Mozambique, and Germany. And so some interesting things about this group. They'll start doing phishing with monthly reports. So you may not click on the first fish in February with that report, but by late May, you're used to seeing those reports and you may click that because, hey, if it comes every month, it can't be malicious, right? Another interesting thing is that the group configures their C2 to look like a normal website if you visit the wrong page. According to Kaspersky, they often show pictures of artisanal ice cream or comics unrelated to their target. This group has plenty of 0 days, including 0 days in Internet Explorer vulnerabilities. Interestingly, some of those 0 days are actually used against targets that appear to be located in South Korea. And at this time, it's unclear whether they belong to the multinational companies that happen to be operating in South Korea or domestic South Korean citizens. It would be consistent with South Korean geopolitical aims to solicit information from companies that could be considered competitors. So that's the way I personally lean on that. But again, some really cool stuff. They also targeted the World Health Organization earlier this year in relation to COVID-19. So next we have some water buffalo from Vietnam. So APT32, also known as Ocean Lotus, is a really unique set because with the right visibility, it's easy to see how their campaigns align with Vietnamese state interests. Nick Carr, formerly of FireEye, now with Microsoft, has done a great job reporting what FireEye had seen from this threat. Since 2014, they have consistently targeted foreign corporations with manufacturing, consumer products, and hospitality sectors. They've also targeted Vietnamese diaspora, journalists, and activists, as well as government agencies. What's interesting is that the targeting isn't just for straight intellectual property theft like a lot of intrusions are. but rather they're serving a law enforcement / audit purpose. The best example of this would be the automobile industry, where Vietnam implemented strict regulations for importing cars. Following those laws, multiple car manufacturers, including Toyota and BMW, were attacked in late 2019 by Ocean Lotus. And these attacks happened quicker than the meeting notes sometimes got out from those new laws. We talked about how Ocean Lotus conducts operations against typical targets for a government-sponsored adversary. These include operations against other government agencies, most located regionally. According to the EFF, they've also been known to target journalists and activists. Ocean Lotus actually leaked transcripts between the Philippine President Duarte with world leaders, both the President of the United States and the Chinese President. So another threat actor with ties to Vietnam and some overlap with Ocean Lotus is Phantom Lance. First publicly reported in spring of 2020, Kaspersky estimated they've been active since around 2016. They primarily conducted attacks using mobile malware. The first version that they submit to the store is clean with no malicious code, but later updates then contain malicious code and payload to make it past the screening. This allows them to successfully enter the App Store. Targeting information is consistent with Vietnamese state interest in Southeast Asia. The majority happen to be in India, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Indonesia, Nepal, Myanmar, and Malaysia. So next we have Machete, possibly Colombia or Venezuela attribution. They've been active since 2010, revamped in 2012. They're a Spanish-speaking APT, and they're looking for photos from webcams, geolocation, audio from microphones. Targeting includes Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador, along with Russia. So you're seeing both, whether they're based out of Colombia or Venezuela, you're seeing both domestic and foreign targeting by this group, which I think does not get as much attention as some of the other ones. All right, so what? So we've talked a lot about different adversaries, a lot of content. So first off, let's talk trends. It's evident that smaller governments have no problem using these targeted attacks against dissidents, journalists, and sometimes even their own citizens. If you have employees or friends in these groups, please make sure they're protected. The Google Advanced Protection Program is now free for everyone. Get a hardware token. Get to work protecting yourselves as defensives. If you're a multinational company, when was the last time that you threat modeled the local governments or the governments that may affect your local subsidiaries, your businesses? Do you conduct work in a place that may conduct cyber operations against you? Couple suggestions would be, have you read reporting from companies that are doing work specifically in those regions? A lot of times their reporting is unique and it's quicker than some of the larger players. I personally am a fan of getting outside of just the American InfoSec bubble and getting intelligence from other places, because I think that allows us a better, fuller picture of what the threat landscape actually looks like. And have you seen unique regional targeting? I think if you have and you're able to share some TTPs and trends that you've seen, that will help everyone understand the landscape better and understand the threat better. Red Team, hopefully you saw some interesting things to make yourself look more like actual adversaries and not just trying to get the latest exploit to work. And again, please share the information that you see. I think it's really great to share across the industry. Like I mentioned before, all images were from Pixabay. Citations to the original research are located on Pastebin, or scan the QR code and I'll take it to you. I did cite a ton of public research. Please go read there. There's some great work, and the researchers and journalists did an amazing job of reporting it, and I want to make sure that if you have a specific adversary you're interested in, go dig deeper and engage with that work, because it's great work. So thank you so much. Again, follow me at Chicago Cyber. Appreciate you listening to me. I've really enjoyed. Wish I could have been in Poland for ZFCon, but never know, maybe next year. If you have any questions, I will hopefully be joining shortly to answer them. All right, thank you so much.